Hi, my name's Bill Herzer. I've been a member of the club since 1996. We've been at the library for 20 some odd years, I think 23 now, and this is one of the first years we won't be at the library, so we thought we would do this visual presentation instead. Now, this area represents Milton and Milton Junction around 1913, because this station that's modeled here was the original station. The one that you see now in Milton is its replacement because this building burnt in 1912. This is how the Milton House would have looked before the collapse. Now, the two members who built this were both longtime residents of Milton, and one of the gentlemen was actually the president of the Historical Society. So while the buildings aren't accurate in their placement, they're accurate in size and how they would have looked around 1913. This little building next to it, the Grand Hotel, actually existed. Where our parking lot entrance is now is where this would have stood. Usually, guests from the railroad would stay, or the stagecoach would stay in the Milton House itself. There were apartments all along the top floor that were rented, and these were all shops. It's like one of the original strip malls. This hotel was a little bit rougher, so many of the railroad people stayed there rather than passengers. The grain, lumberyard, all these structures here stand where right now the Black Hawk Credit Union is. The water tower was a big feature of the area for years and years. And we had a member, or rather a guest, come in who was in his 80s or 90s tell us how as a kid they used to stand on this water tower and throw water down on the railroad passengers when they walked by. Now, we'll go down this way towards Milton Junction. This is a model of the restaurant that was the original station, and before this there was a building called the Morgan House, which served as the depot for the Chicago Northwestern and the Milwaukee Road. This was its replacement. It's been a restaurant for as long as I can remember. The red building represents a tobacco warehouse. These were built according to plans from the Milwaukee Road. This was sold, I think, about 15 years ago in an auction. A gentleman bought it, dismantled it, and used all the lumber to build his new home. And Milton Junction was named because the two railroads crossed at that point. And they were separate towns at one time, Milton Junction, and they joined together to form one community. These two modules over here are part of what we call our generic system. They're not supposed to be modeling anything in specific, but they're supposed to be timeless enough that we can go from the 20s to today without any problem on it being accurate for the trains going through.
Hello, my name is Bill Alt. I've been a member of the WIS-ILL Club since 1995. I joined the club because at the time I did not have a layout at my house, and that was probably the main reason. Also wanted to meet some other guys in the hobby and learn some techniques from them. And it's been a wonderful learning experience for the last many, many years. Anyway, today I'm going to talk about our end module for the permanent layout here. I really shouldn't call it a module because it replaced a module, something that we took from show to show. So it was set up, taken down several times a year. During the transit, kind of got beat up a little bit. So what we needed to do was build a permanent structure here for our permanent display at the Milton House. Visitors to our traveling show or the permanent layout always enjoy a tunnel scene. So what I tried to do is I tried to create something, believe it or not, in Wisconsin, a little bit southwest of Evansville on the old Illinois Central line, which is now a bike trail, is a tunnel. So that's what I tried to create here in my theme. Obviously not very tall of a landscape around it, but what I tried to do is simulate to what it actually is out there right now as far as the type of brick and the color and my landscaping and things like that. Obviously a lot of rural and farm in that area, so what I did was I created a farm scene. Always got to break that up a little bit. I created this forest scene over here by starting with some sedum plant from my backyard, and used the various techniques in the hobby to create trees and then forest and create that space over here. I did want to get some type of a farm area with crops, and so what I did over in this area is I took a runner mat that I purchased at the local hardware store, and basically it already had the grooves in it. Color was good. I just simply put some glue on the top of the ridges and sprinkled my what we call ground foam to simulate a low crop over here. And then obviously you had to taper this back down for the other tunnel portal on this side. This is a project that I promised the club I would do, and it took me a while before I actually got around to doing it. I told my wife this shouldn't take too long. Needless to say, this occupied part of our dining room, the basement, for several months last winter. She was more than happy and helpful to get it out of the house and in our permanent spot here in Milton. All right, so in this section of the module, I did create some of my own rock castings. So these are actual plaster castings. You pour the plaster in a rubber mold, let it set up, take it out, and then you end up painting the plaster to the color that you'd like. So I chose a color that was similar to this area of Wisconsin. We have a lot of limestone and sandstone. But then to try to add a little bit more realistic to it, I included some actual real stones. So this down here is plaster, and this is actual real stone pieces. As we look around, again, a lot of plaster, real stone on top to add some dimension. This guy over here just happened to fit in very well. That's as real as it gets. No plaster there, and the same thing with these guys. One of the benefits of using the plaster, you're able to cut it very easily. So you can slice it and cut it in pieces to fit into the sections that you want to around here, whereas cutting real stone is a little bit more difficult.
So my name is Phil Zagon, and I joined the WIS-ILL Club in 2009. And I have had model trains in my life since I was like 5 years old. My dad had trains, and then we had trains together, and then the trains became mine. And I joined a club because I wanted to get out and get out of my basement and experience the hobby with other people and go to train shows and show off the hobby that I have, because not that many people come to my basement on a regular basis. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this group of modules here and how we build the scenery and construct the scene that is on it. So for our layout, we chose to start with a flat plywood surface. There are several different ways to build a layout, but because our layout is fairly narrow, we chose to go with plywood because it gives you a better base for the various tracks that you want to use, and it's a nice flat surface to attach things to. So here is just standard piece of plywood that you would buy at the hardware store. And on top of that, we use sheets of cork or 1/4 inch plywood, and we build that up so that the track is a little higher than the surrounding land. So if you ever see a real railroad, you'll notice that the track is almost higher than everything around it. You know, they do that for very practical purposes. They want to be able to have water run away from the track, not wash out the track or do anything to damage the trains to go over the track. So we use the cork, and then the track goes on top of the cork. And then from there, we have the grass and the other scenery. And there's an infinite number of products available to make scenery. I personally, on my home layout, I start out with a combination of real dirt and real sand because it's inexpensive, and I don't necessarily always feel like paying $10 a bottle for purchased scenery materials. And it just creates a nice base. So it's just like real life. You know, there's dirt, and then the grass grows on top of the dirt, and then bushes and stuff grow on top of the grass. When it comes to the actual track, we usually paint the track so that by default the track kind of looks like this, where it's very shiny, has a black plastic railroad ties between the rails. And when you paint it, it gives it more of a realistic look, because the real train track isn't shiny or clean in any way. So it gets painted a brownish, blackish, grimy color. And then because our trains run on electricity, you have to clean that paint all off the top of the track. Once the paint dries, then you can apply the other scenery materials like ballast and grass and weeds and things that grow between the track. So the ballast, usually use a commercial available ballast. So this is a company that produces all sorts of different colors of ballast. On our club, we use a combination of grays, but every railroad uses a different color ballast. So like the Chicago Northwestern was famous for their Pink Lady granite. That was a very specific thing to their railroad. Other railroads just use grays or browns or whatever they've got laying around. Also, as you'll notice here, the main lines are a little different than the sidings and stuff. So the railroad's going to invest more in their main lines. They're going to use better gravel with better drainage and better support for the track. And when it comes to side tracks and sidings, they're going to use more inexpensive, readily available materials. Sometimes even cinders from steam locomotives and power plants, or just gravel that they scrape up out of the desert. Obviously, the world is not flat. We start out with a flat piece of plywood, and a lot of the time you want to build up the ground around it. So this is a good example of a hillside that has been carved out by a quarry or carved out to make room for something else. A member of our club made this, and it is stacked styrofoam. So the standard blue and pink styrofoam that you would buy at any hardware store, they stacked it up to the height that they wanted, and they glued it together using construction adhesive. And once it's dry, it's like one big solid piece. So you're able to carve or shape the styrofoam to your, to any shape that you'd like. So initially they shaped, the rolling hill on the top, and then he came back with a knife and carved all these little details to make it look like a rock face. Now normally you would secure this down to the layout with glue. In this case, this just sits loose, so we can, at this point, we can still move it around and decide on where we want its final location to be. So this is a city scene. So building a city scene is different than building a country scene, because you have to worry about things like sidewalks and roads and vehicles and things of that nature. So here, this is an area that's under construction, and we started out by using just simple gray paint to represent where we thought the roads needed to go. So we painted it gray, and then we've placed the buildings where we want them. Some of the buildings are complete, others are missing sidewalks or other features of the building. So like here, because we don't have a sidewalk for this building yet, we're using a piece of cardboard that's painted gray to simulate the look of the sidewalk. That gives us a visual representation of what it's going to look like when it's done, because you don't want to spend a bunch of time and money and effort making all these sidewalks, and then you decide, oh, that doesn't quite fit the way I want it. Oftentimes, even before you build the buildings, people will build cardboard or styrofoam mock-ups of what they want the building to look like, so that they can place it in that location, make sure it fits with the surrounding scenery and the other buildings around it. That way they don't waste more time and effort and can make faster progress on their layout. Eventually, once we decide that this is the exact layout that we want to have, we'll have matching sidewalks going in front of all the buildings. We will put some paving material on the road, so that can be plaster, or some companies make a unrollable stick-down road surface. there's various options for it, like everything. Finish the scenery up to the roads and put some signage on the buildings and make it really look like a real city scene. When it comes to powering the model railroad, there are two main standards. There is DC power, and there's digital command control, or DCC. We have both power sources here because we are a club and we have multiple members, and people sometimes have DC locomotives and they sometimes have DCC locomotives. So we have control systems that are able to accommodate all of our members. So DC it's sort of like the old standard. It's a simple power pack. You have fast, slow, and stop, and forward and reverse. Ours is slightly more complicated. We have wireless walk-around control, but it's basically still the same thing. There's a fast, a slow button, forward and reverse, and emergency stop. On DCC, the two systems are not interchangeable. So using these control panels, we're able to switch back and forth between the two different systems. So if someone wants to run a DC train, it's as simple as throwing a switch and they can run their DC train. So DCC is similar to DC in the fact that it sends voltage down the rails, but it's a constant voltage. So it's always sending the same signal down the rails. And it uses a computer, basically, to send signals to the locomotives to tell them when to go, when to stop. And then also, there's a whole lot of other features they can do. So they can make sound, they can have braking. There's just a lot of different features that the locomotives can do instead of just going forward, reverse, and stopping. The other big advantage is that you can run multiple trains on the same track at the same time. With DC, if you turn the speed up to full or into half or whatever, all the trains on the track are going to go the same speed and they're going to go in the same direction. With DCC, you select a locomotive, you tell it what way you want it to go, and you can have 2 different locomotives or 10 different locomotives going different directions at the same time on the same track. So in a lot of ways, it simplifies wiring and control, and it allows you to have more flexibility when running your trains. So this is our staging yard. We have 3 tracks on the outside and 3 tracks on the inside. This is where the members can come in, they can set up their trains, and they can have them ready to go when it's their turn to run a train. That way, when we're having a show or an open house, we can always have a train running on the track, because as one train pulls in, we can pull out another train and a different member can be running their train very quickly.